right now, but you can choose whatever chip you want.
If you are,
No, actually, yeah, no, it's better. It's
It's a peer-to-peer network where you like send it to my computer that's in.
no, it is online too, actually, but no, something don't work. So,
Okay.
yeah. No, this will be fine. I'm just like.
But you don't want to minimize it because you feel like it's gonna.
Well, it did that weird thing.
But did it tell you when you minimized it? Did it tell
Control
you?
Alt Shift H.
Okay, try that. Control Shift H.
Okay. I'm just a bit scared that
It's about just enough time. Okay. And then do it again when it comes back.
Hi, do you want to speak one more time for us?
Certainly. Test, test, test. Hello.
Hey, it
Hello, Rotterdam.
works. Thanks, Doug.
Good. We're just getting some things set up over here.
That's fine, us too, and eating our chips.
Good. Some more coffees over here.
Hey.
what's up, nerds?
Hey, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah.
We're excited you guys talk.
You're all laved up. I like it.
I don't know why I have this.
I'm going to pop in and out.
Yeah, this is a bit.
Oh,
No, but so Zoom is having weird issues.
I've been told
I think
you should come share your stuff. I'll go in and then I'll come back.
yes. I'm gonna do.
Jesus, got a quick shirt on. But they go around.
I'm not gonna mess with it.
You good?
Yeah.
Hello, I've got the little.
We'll have lunch.
No, there's something odd just with.
What is it?
It was. I'll just leave it up because it has a bit of a weird effect with. I had to start. Sorry again.
Good. You?
I'll just leave it.
Was it nice to class
It's just
yesterday?
like I couldn't quite.
It
get-
was,
No,
actually.
I'm just looking at what
I had-
your screen share
But
is
I had a
showing.
funny
Right.
moment. I
This is
had
what we are
three
trying to look at.
Oh, okay.
student presentations.
Yeah.
And what I realized after I started class was that
Oh yeah,
two
no,
of the
no,
students
it's
had dropped the class
stuck
already.
because I quit. So.
Oh.
But
Yeah,
I didn't think so. I was like, okay, I'm going to do a mini
I do
quick
window
lecture on photography and post photography.
You can improvise. Yeah, nice.
I did it. I'm
Yeah.
like, okay,
Oh.
break for 5 minutes.
Yeah, it's.
And
Yeah.
no, we had a crit and then we had a talk. Oh, sorry, we had a talk. I showed them Gabriella Roscoe's work.
Okay.
Yeah, do you know Gabriella Roscoe's work? It's great.
Okay, I think it's good. And then the problem was that if I try to hide this, it's a bit freaky.
Oh.
It doesn't. I can't.
Yeah, no, I always
We
recommend
had
you shove it
nerds.
as
We had
far up
a
to
nerd
the
day.
bar as possible.
Sorry if I was
Because that
like,
will not disappear. That
I
is not
think I
supposed
was
to be
good.
visible
I like
to
it.
everyone.
Do you?
Okay.
I'm a
It's
listener.
visible to
Oh,
you. That's
okay.
how you control what's going on.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes I
This
worry
will sometimes
after
become
I'm with a
visible, so you can
listener
minimize and
if I take up
minimize
too much space.
No, you never do.
if it wants to
You're always
respond
on
to you.
No.
I think so. I hope so.
Okay.
Okay.
Also that one so you can see what you have going on.
All right.
Sure. Then here. Then I'll.
You're going to be amazing.
Perfect.
Oh, thanks.
You're going to be excited to hear your
Oh,
work.
but I'm going to share my desktop.
Thanks.
This is not
I'm
right.
actually scared about the technical.
Sorry.
Do this again. So
Yeah.
you can
The
stop your
tech?
screen
The tech,
share.
I'm scared. I'm always like, this
So
is like,
stop it before you
should be
restart, 'cause that's
You
where
know
you're gonna
Murphy's
run
Law.
into your issues.
Yeah.
So I'm preparing everyone to start singing some
Like a wild horse.
bossa nova to
Alright,
like
I'll do
kind of have
desktop.
this
Share.
elevator.
That's the man.
Exactly.
Is it?
You're known for your bossa
is
nova
the-
skills.
Beautiful, stunning.
Okay,
11 out of
the
10.
girl from Ipanema.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was
Okay.
asking. The girl from
Mm.
Ipanema.
I can hum it.
Did you get your delivery then already?
My no, it's actually coming in a bit, but
Oh yeah.
I've been roped into a toddler parade.
Oh.
my son's doing a St. Patrick's Day parade, but without the drinking and fist fights and peeing in the corner like you might have experienced in Boston.
I don't know about for toddlers, yeah.
Well, they might be in the corner.
The drinking I accept, but the pee.
Yeah, there could be apple juice. Yeah, we have our big St. Patrick's Day parade next weekend.
I've never been.
Yeah, it goes right along here, actually, just right here. Yes, but spending some time in New England, I'm like, I've had enough. I've had a few too many.
I don't feel the draw.
Yeah, I don't want to get in a fight with somebody while they're peeing.
Well, they're
Yeah.
all of it at the same time.
sorry, I'm the comic relief to relieve the stress at the beginning.
We really appreciate it.
All right.
I was going to ask if this
How
was
you doing,
for you.
sir?
Good?
Yeah,
You?
not too bad.
Coming in?
Yeah.
Stick around?
I thought it was like
in and out.
No,
a pop of
but I
color.
wanted it. No, indeed.
Did you go?
I did.
Yeah. How was it? Yeah.
I think it was like the bed,
Yeah.
the microphone,
behind the scenes.
the little.
Also, it's staff too, so it's kind of
Yeah, exactly. It still does too.
Oh, cool. Well, their whole lab situation is so interesting, right? I think it's cool. We had some nice
We had a
walkabout.
great time.
Yep.
That was a major highlight of last year.
Yeah.
I think maybe the highlight of last year. Although I did have a good time in Berlin last year. But Rotterdam was good.
How do we feel? You ready to go?
I think so.
Pip, I'll do a kind of formalish introduction off camera.
Oh, cool. Do
No,
you
Pat-
do bios? Are you bioing?
I don't have the bios,
You
but I
don't have
could.
to,
I was going to
I mean.
this is what I'm asking.
I'm happy not to.
So
It's
just
the
to say, because
normal
like this,
thing.
I have this slide.
Okay.
So
That's not, we want bio, then
Yeah.
you do territorial
I
acknowledgement.
do.
Perfect. Okay.
And then I was going to introduce you to sort of welcome and introduce
Absolutely.
who's here, like just by name and that title maybe.
Yeah.
Artists, educators, whatever the title may be.
Amazing folks.
But you'll like first word to you. So I'm going to I'll pass the mic to
And then
you.
I will pass it to Michael. Who's next?
Nice.
Michael.
Okay.
And if anything happens, like Zooms and live stream share, we'll just come fix it. Like,
Okay.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we're all here.
Thanks.
That's good. We
Perfect.
embrace awkwardness.
Pippin?
Yes.
Yes.
Should we move that thing to over there so it's not in the camera?
Is it in the shot?
Am I being like too much?
No, I like it.
I'm just wondering,
Is that out?
I'll be primping his
Thank you.
collar soon.
That's really
to
good.
make sure-
And then put the shine.
You got a good shine, just the right amount of shine.
Okay, we can get some things started up over here. Jaxie, if you could open up the waiting room on Zoom, I think our music is down. And we can, Birdie, if we could start up the recording. And then the live stream to YouTube, let us know when that's up. You'll see our on-airs light up. I'll do a very brief introduction here, and then I'll pass it over to Pippin. So hold on, everyone.
Maybe should we just have a
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's Force-Space. Thanks for joining us for today's event, WdKA, live from Montreal. Now, this is a conversation with Michael Murtaugh and Lídia Pereira Malho Rodrigues, conversation with Pippin Barr. This is part of an ongoing exchange between the Faculty of Fine Arts here at Concordia and the Willem de Kooning Academy in Rotterdam. That's been happening over multiple years. And Surabhi, Ghosh and Aaron McIntosh were there in Rotterdam at WdKA in October 2025 and presented their work from there. And so we're also welcoming our friends and colleagues at Willem de Kooning who are joining us here via Zoom. And welcome to you and happy, I guess, good afternoon. Okay, we would like to begin here by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, and we respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. And here at ForceSpace, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge. We co-create daily activities that examine research questions, projects, things happening all across our university. And we're running today's event as a live stream both to YouTube and as a Zoom meeting. So if you're joining us there, if you have any comments, you have any questions, pop those into the chat. We'll read them out a little bit later on. Those of you here with us, same thing, just raise your hand, we'll run a microphone over to you. Okay. It's very much my pleasure now to throw the microphone to Associate Professor in Design and Computation Arts here at Concordia, Dr. Pippin Barr. Pippin, over to you.
Well, that was really exciting. Thanks for that, Doug. And I'm overwhelmed by the reception that I have here in the room, especially. Thanks for having us at the Fourth Space. This is the fruits of, as Doug said, this ongoing collaboration between the Willem de Kooning Academy in Rotterdam and Fine Arts here at Concordia. And at the very heart of this is people moving from one country to the other, hanging out with the people there, making connections, big and small. There are dreams of program building. There are also just dreams of good conversation, which is what I'm hoping that we will have today. I met Lydia and Michael when I was over in Rotterdam last year, and had a wonderful time and wanted to talk to them a lot more than I actually had the chance to. So that is the plan right now. Michael and Lydia are going to give us a couple of artist talks, which I believe contain some incredibly provocative provocations for me, and I will respond in kind. And then we'll have a conversation, take any questions, and see where it leads us. So I will ask Michael to hit it like a blues brother.
Thanks, Pippin. Yeah, thanks a lot, and thanks really for all the effort that's gone in, indeed, helping plan this and hosting us here. It's been really great. So the title of the talk that I'm going to present is Unboxing Cognitive Assemblages, SI-17. This box has found you for a reason. So a little cryptic, but hopefully will be explained in due course of the presentation. I have divided in two parts. First, some context. So who am I? So Michael Murtaugh is indeed my name. That's my personal website, but I studied computer science and interactive cinema back in the 90s, when that was a thing, in Boston. I've been a member of Constant since 2008, which is based in Brussels, where I live. And I'm also a member of an artist collective that's called the Institute for Computational Vandalism, for various reasons, since 2014. And I've been the course director of XPUB since 2022 in Rotterdam. And in this talk, what I'm going to try to do is break it up into two parts. The first is I'm going to revisit the origins and the development of this course and my role within it, and make a parallel to the developments of ideas of media art scholar Catherine Hales, whose research and interest in the materiality of the book and in so-called cognitive assemblages I think are really helpful in framing the values and ways that we work in the course. In part two, I will, inspired by Hales's framework, try to make a close reading of a specific X-publication I wrote. I don't know, I've never said that, but perhaps it's a thing. Special issue 17, which is actually this plexiglass cube. Well, the physical version of it is this, published in 2022. And along the way, I'm going to make some observations relating to practices of documentation and archiving that I hope have specific interest to digital and computational media. So, and I'm also going to be trying to balance between 3 different devices. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. In 2002, so this is a little zoom back, 2002, I started teaching in a newly developed media design master in Rotterdam. The program was developed by Femke Snelting, who was a member of the artist collective De Gozen, Dutch based collective, and who had studied graphic design at the Willem de Kooning Academy in Rotterdam, where this new master was to be based. Femke brought in Matthew Fuller to co-direct the program, who also had a background working with collectives, in this case the London-based Mongrel, and also Callum Selkirk, who was a Linux system administrator and educator. This image is a figure from a recent article that called Tools Shape Practice Shape Tools from Femke Snelting and Minetta Behrens, who is a colleague of Lydia and I at XPUB, and which tells a thorough and situated account of a larger network of collectives and groups in Europe in which XPUB is just one node, and who are doing graphic design with floss tools. Free, Libre, open source software. So yeah, what I forgot to say is indeed from its inception, the Media Design Master was unique in making work with floss tools and floss design tools central to its ways of working. So the poster itself that's depicted in this image is a collage of logos of different projects promoting open content through alternative so-called copyleft licenses. A core motivating idea with the master was the exploration of how communities of practice, such as those around free software, might have contact and exchange with communities of practice around design and the arts. The poster was designed by Femke using GIMP and Scribus,
as a deliberate choice to move away from the familiarity of proprietary design tools such as the Adobe Creative Suite. And that gesture has been a key part of what we in the master have tried to nurture and accommodate. So later, reflecting on our experiences in 2008, Femke wrote about, while a familiar gesture is one that fits perfectly well in a generally accepted model, an awkward gesture is a movement that is not completely synchronic. It's not a counter movement nor a break from the norm. It doesn't exist outside of the pattern nor completely inside it. Like a moire effect reveals the presence of a grid, awkward behavior can lead to a state of increased awareness, a form of productive insecurity that presents us with openings that help understand the complex interactions between skills, tools, and medium. So this was a really inspirational kind of way of thinking, and it's something that indeed, also even in moments like this, when I'm highly mediated, we often like to kind of say, yes, as a course, we try to give space to that and talk about it and not pretend, oh, this is natural. So also in 2002, Catherine Hales published, who comes from, by the way, a kind of mix of literature, English, and design in the media arts. So in 2002, she published in collaboration with the designer Anne Burdick the book Writing Machines. There's a physical copy of it here. And it was the first in a release of MIT Press's media pamphlet series that paired writers and designers with the goal, according to the afterword, of producing theoretical fetish objects with visual, tactile, and yes, intellectual appeal, and established new categories for describing the emotional and physical relationship readers have with what and how they read. So the book had a number of tactile features, such as a textured cover, but also the outside edge. If you flex, you notice that the title is written on the bleed. And it also made use of some maybe dated effects like fisheye effects on pull quotes, signaling the digital, as is shown here. So in Writing Machine, Hales defines a technotext as when a literary work interrogates its inscription technology that produces it. It mobilizes reflexive loops between the imaginative world and the material apparatus embodying that creation as a physical presence. So said more directly, she's talking about technotexts are books that somehow refer to their own materiality. And yeah, that was a very also influential concept to us. Speaking of that, in the middle of the book, you have a kind of thing called the lexicon link map, and a link to what was billed as an online supplement. Actually, interestingly, Hales notes in the afterword too, she regrets a bit the fact that all the footnotes were not included in the publication due to the constraints of the media pamphlet series. So she encourages you to go to the web supplement to find the missing footnotes and use these extra bonus features. Well, nowadays, if you go to that link, you will get a 404 page. Happily, there are projects like the Wayback Machine that have attempted to make snapshots of such websites. Oops, but it was written in Flash. Oh, but the Wayback Machine has an open source Flash emulator called Ruffle. Hooray, you can see the splash screen of the web supplement, but when you try to click on a link, it doesn't quite work.
Oh.
So of course, Flash being a proprietary format, some things like using the network maybe aren't really well emulated nowadays. We may never find the missing footnotes of Writing Machines. I bring an option, Jeffrey Bowker, who wrote about wrote about archiving and in-memory practices in the sciences in 2005, gives 3 points that he calls problems with this notion of a perfect archive. First, he talks about the problem of high overhead. So it'd be nice, for instance, to preserve all of the murals painted on external walls in Italy, but then you aren't able to paint your walls to preserve them, or it becomes inordinately expensive to do so. He also talks about perfect memory does not matter if no one is listening to your stories. The archival literature in the sciences seems to imagine that someday someone will have time to go back and read all the material and make sense of it, assigning priority, determining value, and so forth. This to him seemed the secular version of the Last Judgment, that an equally dependent and dependent equally on some kind of entity that will have massive data storage and analysis, and in 2005 wrote, there's no evidence that this entity is in the process of formation. The last point that he makes, which I really love, is he says, perfect memory is not always what it seems. And he gives the example of the Isa shrine. And basically, this is a shrine that's rebuilt every 20 years as a way to then, you could say it's the oldest such structure standing, which materially speaking is maybe not literally true, but true in the sense that this 20-year window allows the kind of sociality of the skills to be passed on using original materials and tools to actually reconstruct the structure. So, indeed, in thinking about documentation and archiving, I love this example because it's always about what's important to archive, who's it for, why, what do you valorize, consider the temporalities, the short to the long term, and consider the human and also natural resources needed to maintain those archives. So, 20 years later, zoom ahead, rebuilding the shrine. In 2016, Amérique Monsou, a colleague in the master, took over direction of the program and made the focus on publishing explicit with the new course name and description. XPUB is the Master of Arts in Fine Art and Design, Experimental Publishing of the Piet Zwart Institute, which is just the name for the masters in Willem de Kooning. XPUB focuses on the acts of making things public and creating publics in the age of post-digital networks. And indeed, there's two kind of, it describes that XPUB's interests in publishing are then an inquiry and participation into technological frameworks, political context, and cultural processes through which things are made public, and how these are or can be used to create publics. I'll come back to that at the very end, just to give some context, hopefully. But one thing, for myself, coming from a computer science background, a thing I find interesting actually in thinking about publishing was, for instance, the realization of actually how many concepts that are quite central to code work are borrowed from publishing. So, for instance, the sources used by journalists and cited by academics. Source code is then the basis of all software. Libraries being the basic unit of reuse in code. Compilation, which is actually the process in a code sense of taking sources to executable form via linking and binding the code libraries. Again, it's sort of rife with metaphors of physical publishing and books. Books are stored in depositories, code in repositories. Editorial markup done in pencil to specify typography is now formalized in markup processes like HTML that standardize those specifications. Also 20 years later, Hales revisits her thinking with postprint. And so that's a book I bought in EPUB form, so this is actually one physical instantiation of it. Doesn't really matter, but it's an e-reader that has the text on it. And basically postprint is a really big update. It's incorporating Hales' ongoing research in that she's explored in a series of books in the intervening 20 years about how and why computational media has such a particular impact on publishing, but also culture at large. And specifically, she uses, in postprint, she integrates a very careful definition of cognition that she's developed in the intervening years, which is cognition is a process of interpreting information in context that connect it with meaning. And she continues to say that although my definition of cognition focuses primarily on individual cognizers, I also want to emphasize that interpretations and meaning-making practices circulate through trans-individual collectivities. What does it say there? I can't see it. Created by fluctuating and dynamic interconnections between humans and computational media. Interconnections that she calls then cognitive assemblages. So for Hales, what's important about this definition of cognition is that it spans humans, non-humans, and computational media. And then through the consideration of assemblages allows you ways of thinking, for instance, how the decisions we make, the actions we take, are all mitigated by the particular assemblages we're part of. So she gives a whole bunch of examples from like starting a car to using a cell phone to paying in a restaurant with a card, emphasizing each time the fact that where we are now has become completely interdependent on computation and software. All of these processes that in the past may have just been mechanical or physical, somehow physically performable. And so in this way, she's making a connection between the way language, movable type, spell checkers, all the way through to contemporary AI, and things like large language models are examples of these kinds of assemblages. So back to XPUB. As a course, XPUB is deeply interested in the specific cognitive assemblage that designers, programmers, and artists have with the software networks that they use to reach and activate publics. Besides just software alternatives, XPUB as a course is interested in exploring alternative workflows that allow a flexibility of roles. So within a conventional workflow, design is often something at the end of a process where content, so-called content, has to be locked down and turned into given form. At the same time, these same workflows really have the tools, the structural decisions, let's say, made by developers and programmers embedded in the tools are similarly kind of frozen in place before anything happens. So yeah, in our course, the ideal is to find ways of working that explore the exploration between these roles and ultimately between form and content. So I wanted to give just a reference here to a colleague of ours, revisiting Bowker in 2005, his fear of, or speaking of the entity, I think could be seen in contemporary discourse around AI, which might be seen as somehow justifying another need to have massive accumulations of data and access of digital archives. An XPUB colleague of both of us, Marloes de Valk, recently completed her doctoral thesis, which looks at how, for instance, contemporary politics around data centers are part of a history of damaging misunderstanding of technology as somehow disconnected from lived experience or material limits, and thus the resulting kind of ecological damage that occurs to something like a data center. Last part of then post-print. So in post-print and in my EPUB version of it, Hales has a series of what she calls X-rays, which she says are there to enhance the reader's awareness of the code layers essential for generating the print page in the post-print era. The book features 10 black pages with special sort of code views. So you see indeed some XML, some HTML from apparently the EPUB version, some Flash, well, actually a kind of HTML of a Flash player when she gives a reference to a Flash work, and also some JavaScript code. So I break now to part 2, which is my intention of actually doing such a kind of decomposition. Oh, the box has opened, indeed.
It's open.
I just, so what I intend to do is do a kind of reading of Special Issue 17, a box and a box and a box. And I've got pictures as well, so actually, indeed, the physical publication is here, and I'll maybe just tip it out so you can see it. So 2 plexiglass cubes, one orange, one purple, held together by stickers. On the top, you read Special Issue 17, 2022. Special issue, a play on words between 2 senses of issue, meaning a theme, and also a periodical publication, as in the March 2022 issue, 17th in a series. I'll just say March 2022 was a very pivotal time for myself because it was the moment that I moved from being a prototyping tutor to becoming the course director, as Amarique then became a researcher within the Willem de Kooning Research Center. On the bottom of the cube, XPUB and XPUB, you read, and PNF, the letters which stand for Page Not Found, a space for publishing as an artistic practice, a bookstore in The Hague whose name refers to the web's 404 error, a bookstore for the post-print era. On one side of the box, this box has found you for a reason. On the other, a box in a box is a loot box. Intrigued, you open the box. The box addresses you. Dear player, I found you for a reason. Welcome to my productive space. Here, play meets work. Time is ordered in unusual ways and patterns unravel. Together, we mess with the boundaries between leisure and labor. And on the back of the letter, actually, you have a colophon, which I'll show here as well, because actually most of the things that I'm showing come from these 12 then first-year students of the XPUB program. So flipping through, as it were, I could physically flip through this cube. Flipping through the stack of 850 pages reveals an animated progress bar in lieu of page numbers, a playful techno-textual device that reveals the publication's 12 chapters to be of diverse lengths and content. Most of the pages contain texts, often single sentences, that somehow respond to the title of the section. The second page is or actually the first page after the letter is a table of contents showing the 12 chapters that are inside. The second page is a link, a QR code to a website. The website contains a version of the letter, a table of contents with some online supplements, and a description of the launch event, the colophon, and the license. There's also links to 2 PDFs, one for the orange, one for the purple version. Mysteriously, the purple version is about a ½ megabyte smaller. The first chapter begins, what is a loot box? Inside that, you find pages with text such as a closed box with objects inside, a digital or physical box, a virtual box inside video games containing randomized items. Flipping through, surprise mechanism. It's like gambling because you anticipate what's inside. Excitement, disappointment, exploitation, desire. And finally, a personalized one-to-one interaction or a one-to-machine interaction. The second chapter is called One-Sentence Game Ideas. With pages such as, you are in an empty room with 13 doors that are portals to 13 different rooms. 5 minutes, slow-motion epidemics visually transmitted. Every crisis is a simulation of another crisis. And finally, at the end, a one-sentence games list that never ends, and inspired by Pippin Barr's Game Ideas with a URL.
And a scooter.
And a scooter, indeed. So, a later chapter is called Unfinished Thoughts. This one is fun to look at online because it's a game written in Bitsy, which is a game, casual game generator that the students were exploring. And what's interesting is you have a digital representation then of, in the first case, actually a kind of translation of the mechanism of the loot box into, indeed, something that uses a random generator to playfully, indeed, invoke the mechanism of the loot box. If I look at another of the chapters, we see actually a representation of a Raspberry Pi, which then turns into a kind of 3D extruded view of the object, which allows you to explore it and see its various components, such as a USB port. And what's interesting here is that, oops, when you leave the scene, here's a fun little fact before you leave. This game you are playing right now is stored on a Raspberry Pi. So a bit of a techno-textual note to the materiality of that particular, actually, in fact, the publication was at that time then hosted on a server. So to do the kind of X-ray of Hales, I'm going to dive in, and I have a special effect. There we go. To look at actually, you know, as a course, we're really interested in, say, different temporalities of writing. There are sandbox servers. That's what we call the Raspberry Pis that each group gets is a server, and they're they're learning actually how to use it. There are Git repositories. There are MediaWiki pages. There's Etherpads. There's code notebooks. And there's Zulip threads. So as a course, we embrace a variety of overlapping digital tools that are often self-hosted and maintained. The tools represent a wide variety of temporalities and particularities, allowing users to consider how each influences the particular sociality in writing that's afforded by each. So as an example, for instance, there are indeed is a Git repository where you have the sources of, say, the website, but also actually Francesco Luzzana, who was then a student in the course and is now a prototyping tutor, published the code that is used to generate the post-it notes. So the actual production of the printable content was done with software, which is published here. And for instance, you can read in the README file, for instance, as software uses README files to give a kind of context, indeed there's discussions of the content, and actually a specification for how materials could be written. So for instance, we could look here at the source file of the one-sentence game ideas as a YAML file. And actually, if I go to the raw view, this is actually how it's written. And in fact, actually, what we were looking at before was the output of Camo's, Francesco, AKA Camo's software, Camo's his nickname, where actually if I go in the browser to print it, you see this is in fact, the browser was the software that produced the specific PDF. Besides Git repositories, yeah, I think I'm going to skip this to Git has its own particular temporality, but if we go even deeper, let's say, into the kind of process, we make heavy use of wikis for kind of process documentation. For instance, the syllabus of the course is a wiki page, which Lídia prepared. And so both staff and tutors and students are using this wiki. And we can eventually find, for instance, this kind of resource, which would be really useful to share in an educational context. But we might also go, for instance, to this page, which is actually all about the production of the cube. And so one of the stipulations that Amerique made in setting up the project actually was that it should be produced at a volume of 100, which was quite relatively large scale for a kind of artist book, you could say, production. And so that process was totally embraced and documented by the students. One of the things that actually I think is also very interesting to see here, for instance, if I look at a particular image, I can also see how an image, in this case, is part of a log for the process of this special issue, but later on actually becomes part of a presentation in a student's second year as they're telling the story of their project proposal in the second year of the course. So these are all kind of particularities of this use of the wiki as a documentation medium. There was quite a discussion about license, which is captured in the wiki as well. I mean, is available in the wiki as well. The interesting thing to say here is that we had a session with Amerique Malsou, actually, who has written a lot about actually free software licenses and the relation to artistic practice. They chose for a license called CC4R, which is called the Collective Conditions for Reuse. And it's actually part of a project of Constant in Brussels again. And what's interesting about this license is that it is very explicit about starting out by saying we're not rejecting this idea of ownership, which is where copyright begins, and is trying to kind of think about conditions to then restrict uses that, for instance, would be abusive. And this basically is also that kind of response to, let's say, those early licenses like Creative Commons, then having been recuperated in the kind of passage of time in sort of neoliberal projects. I think the most bitter version being Trump's Truth Social, being based on the open source project Mastodon. So licenses such as CC4R are a kind of response to that. And even second layer, more recently, collective commitment to reuse is an attempt to actually flip the logic of the restrictive license to something that's more a kind of a statement of solidarity in making use, in thinking about reuse as a gesture of solidarity. So these conversations also have involved Che Young Kim, who was a student at the time, and also actually Marloes de Valk. And the last thing here with the price tag actually as well on the box was chosen to be a reflection on the kind of economics of how much the box actually cost materially, and also a kind of reference to the tuition, in fact, that was paid by the students to take part in the course. And that's in some ways reflected in the discussion thread that we had around the course. So I'm nearly at the end. I realize it's maybe, no, it's okay?
That's great.
Okay, well, a couple more examples that all reflect other different temporalities. So the one-sentence game ideas actually was lovely to see, and I'll try to open this. We see actually is making use of a software called Etherpad, and the particularity of Etherpad, it's sort of like the name wiki supposedly reflects, is a reference to the Hawaiian word for quick, but it's relatively slow in compared to the speed of an Etherpad, in the sense that Etherpads actually store every keystroke. So for instance, this is a timeline view of the Etherpad that allows you to see actually the writing in the process. So this is probably Lídia, indeed, setting up the initial structure, which she'll talk about actually in her talk a little bit. But what's wonderful is you see basically the kind of defining visual characteristic of an Etherpad is this kind of distinct color for each author. So you get this kind of sense of a kind of rainbow, colored fish swimming in an aquarium. You see kind of different interactions that occur over time in the writing, and for instance, the making of changes as somebody starts to write something and changes their mind and rewrites it. Yes, indeed. There was actually, this was meant as the provocation. Actually, there's also indeed a link to the Pippin's game ideas.
404, that's the provocation.
This is the provocation. So indeed.
And you broke my website.
Yeah, we broke his website. But happily, actually, there are Wayback Machine does have lovely traces. So we actually can appreciate the particularity of Pippin's original thread on your website back in the day. And the last example of actually a kind of materiality of writing that we're using, code notebooks. So this is actually just, I think, an interesting example that I'm going to scroll to my text. So code notebooks are kind of mashup of spreadsheets and soundboards, I would say, where prose descriptions are mixed with cells of code that can be reperformed with a keystroke. In practice, computer code is always the result of repetition, trial and error. The final form is often, I think, a misrepresentation, because it's the kind of refined end result that I think is both difficult to understand and intimidating. So like the paper equivalent suggests, a code notebook encourages authors to make explorations, leaving their explorations intact and possibly to be returned to later. So in this case, Alex was writing some Python code to try producing some different kinds of patterns, and this was the basis of then a particular game that's part of the printed exploration, the printed publication. So last thing, and that's really the end, just revisiting this XPUB text. So basically, in thinking about these inquiries into technological frameworks, I think it's hopefully clear that we're not just interested in technical formats that do X, Y, or Z, but really in the interrelation with the social through the assemblages. So the way different platforms and choices of tools co-influence and co-create forms of writing together, of making decisions, and ultimately leaving traces. And I think, you know, in thinking of what these two communities of practice can offer each other, software and design, and the arts, I think we think of, you know, how not just sort of one source that can produce many outcomes, but having sort of complementary formats that do different things in different assemblages. Different publics, different networks, different timescales for different needs and abilities. And looking at tools, and free tools in specific, that support flexibility, that embed ideas like dependencies, have different life cycles, support kind of metatextual margins, if you like, and are really based on a sort of sustainable ability to provide access and maintenance across potentially upcoming future generations of caretakers. Yeah. And in keeping with the spirit of sharing sources, I've put the talk with all of the links, actually, because there's quite a few links I know I put in there, online. That was it.
Thank you very much. And let's pass straight over to Lydia, and then we can kind of join these things together and see what happens. Oh, the share. Yes, the share.
Okay.
Oh, that worked. Linux saves the day.
Is this working?
Yes, it looks good.
Yes. Okay, if you give me just a second, because now I need to get my presentation notes. Oh.
Oh yes, that's a classic. This is a classic situation.
Okay, I'm embracing the awkwardness.
Visible process.
This whole process, I just want to, how do I go back to Zoom?
I mean, maybe while Lydia
This is great television, right?
working, and instead of bossa nova humming, which
Yeah.
We can all live without,
Thank you.
there like? Do you think you've run into any kind of? Because we're trying to do similar kinds of things. Like theoretically, maybe not in practice, definitely care about these things. But are there simple?
This is working, I think.
Oh, you're in. Okay, well, wonderful. We can.
No, go.
No, let's hold it for the end. If you're ready, it's let's keep going.
Okay, thank you
That was my
so
version
much.
of bossa nova.
No, yeah, that was great.
The question that is never asked.
It's great bossa nova,
Yeah.
I think, yeah. Thank you so much for your patience. And yeah, hello, I'm Lídia. This is my presentation, which I titled Where There's a Key, There's a Door. I'm not going to introduce myself too much. I realized I completely forgot to do that. But I do that through the presentation, and I don't want to give any spoilers. I want to make it exciting. So, I'll start. Growing up, the only console I had was a Game Boy Color. I also only had the one game, which was the Muppets. You can see some screenshots, weird screenshots there. But I didn't mind the lack of variety, because I was obsessed with Sesame Street, I was obsessed with the Muppets, so I really loved that game. And was I good at it? Not really. Did that matter? Also not really. And my most favorite level was this one, which was Kermit in the Virgin Forest. It was also the one level I could never get past. I spent hours upon hours running around in circles, finding the keys but not the doors, or finding the doors but not the keys, getting very lost, frustrated, but I loved it. And why am I talking to you about all of this, you may be asking? Well, while preparing for this artist talk, and being confronted with the daunting task of making sense of my artistic practice, I realized I am just like Kermit. I am finding keys, I am opening doors, which always lead to other doors, and there's no end in sight to any of this. I still don't know how I would describe my artistic practice. And am I just finding a distracting way to tell you about my imposter syndrome? Yeah, definitely. And all I hope is that this might be getting me somewhere, and that I can explain to you exactly what I mean with this analogy. And so I will first tell you a little bit about my past artistic practice. Then I will move on to tell you about my current PhD research, how that led to teaching, and how that in turn has contributed also to the current status of the PhD research / artistic practice. Goes full circle. So, let's start with what I did in my previous life. I will be talking about only 2 projects. So in my post-artistic practice, I was investigating mostly topics of labor on corporate social networks and the commodification of user data, algorithmic governance, and alternative social technical infrastructures. Very influenced by the course because, and that's a little bit of information that I will give you already, I also was a student somewhere along this long history, not in the current XPUB format, but in the one previous to that, which was media design. So, and I will show you 2 projects indeed that exemplify this engagement. So, the first one of this project is the Pervasive Labor Union zine, which actually started in 2015 as the practical component of my graduation project. for the masters. And the last issue came out in 2019. It was a semi-regular publication that departed from the premise that user activity on corporate social networks is labor. So you see the little Facebook logo with the hammer. So it started actually as a means to understand collaboratively the mechanisms and implications of the monetization of user activity, as well as the possibilities for political organization of labor within this context. Eventually, of course, we broadened our topics to tackle the socio-political consequences of algorithmic governance more generally, the changing nature of labor in times of pervasive computing, so not just in corporate social networks, and also alternative social networks with radically different digital and social infrastructures, for example, the Fediverse. And of course, this was all before the AI explosion, so we didn't even get there. The furthest we got was with smart cities. So, the zine aimed to offer a low barrier entry level for contributors that wish to express their opinions and views on these topics. But more importantly, and this is you will see it's a recurring concern, I wanted to provide a low barrier entry level for people wishing to become acquainted with these debates. The contents include personal rants, also some academic texts, poetry, photo montages, comic strips. I was in charge of the comic strips at the time. Well, I put myself in charge because it was basically my project, but yes. And it worked based on submissions or direct requests for content. And of course, even though it was my project, I had a co-editor for the longest time, was a colleague, Nikos Vojatsis. He also contributed many times to it as well. And I would publish an open call, but we would also approach relevant artists or researchers to ask to reuse any of their existing work, or if they wanted to share something new. And actually, this was mostly based on practicality, because we had no money to pay our contributors, because we also did this for free. So yeah. Next one I will talk about is digital solidarity networks. And digital solidarity networks, it's a collaborative project, and I did it in the context of Varia. I was a member of Varia, which is this collective space based in the south of Rotterdam. There's a nice little space. It still exists. I'm not a member anymore because I stopped having time because of the PhD. But from 2017 to 2021, I was there, and I was part of several collaborative projects. But I will only tell you about one of them that I find quite illustrative, and yeah, it's digital solidarity networks. And you see here maybe a familiar interface that Michael already illuminated, which is the Etherpad. So digital solidarity networks was started by me, by the colleague Manetta Barons that Michael also mentioned, and another colleague, Christina Kokjord. So we did it in March 2020. Does that date sound familiar? It was an online sharing of tools that emerged as a response to the pandemic and the lockdowns, and the moving of even bigger chunks of our lives online. Among others, it was an attempt to counter and offer free, liberal, open source alternatives to the consolidation of power by big tech as a response to the global crisis. So indeed, we used Etherpad to collect a list of reading materials, online cultural initiatives, mutual aid initiatives, and free software tools, such as alternative tools for video conferencing, chat, email, VPNs, file sharing, indeed, all the things that we were using heavily at the time. And we started compiling it at Varia, but several other individuals and organizations contributed to its maintenance, growth, translation, and activation. For example, it has been translated into French, into Portuguese, maybe Spanish. And so, yeah, we had a lot of help also from other organizations. And then more than a year later, we were still kind of in this hybrid format. And we decided to host a series of online events based on this pad, also to activate the list and to invite some of these initiatives that were involved in the growing of and the maintenance of this pad. So self-hosting initiatives like Lurk, the TTPI, which is I always forget. Exactly. I have it there. Perfect. Look at me. Yes. Thank you, Michael. And also Dusan Bahok, who is behind Monoscope, and he was doing a lot of research about artist servers and yeah, and this kind of digital infrastructure. And another activation of the pad. Now I start making a link to games and play. So another activation of this list happened during this event called South Explorer, which is an event that we have in the south of Rotterdam, where galleries and art spaces are open and people can visit them. Of course, we could not have the space open because this was full on during the lockdown. And luckily at Varia we have these big windows. So we created this choose your own adventure game based on the pad. And yeah, it was quite fun, sadly underdocumented. Okay, but here, Kermit stops, momentarily confused, not knowing where to go next. This previous practice, which I have just described, has made me feel very often frustrated. As an artist researching and working around socio-political and technical systems, for my feeling, there always seemed to be a missing link in my work, that between research and practice. I mean, it's there, but it was not to my satisfaction. So I overthink until I underthink, it goes full circle, and I am almost never entirely satisfied with the practical outcomes of my research. I have trouble translating research into practice to a degree that makes me really happy. So that might be because I'm a perfectionist, never mind, until, well, very recently, perhaps some 2-3 months ago, while helping a student struggling with similar concerns, I realized I've been going about it all wrong. What I told the student was, you should not view the practice as a translation of your research, but as another way of investigating your research question. And then I was like, oh, okay. Why am I only wise and insightful when I'm giving advice to others? I think this is a common problem. So yeah, there. I think I might have found an important key, but I am still searching for the door. So while I tell you about this door and where I think it is, I will start with a flashback to 2020, where I hope this next door, which indeed I haven't found yet, but which I hopefully have the key, might lead me. So in 2020, while we were all going through lockdown, I had a most brilliant idea. Let's apply for a PhD, which is what I did. And so in September of that same year, I started my PhD trajectory at the Piet Zwart Arts program, which is a collaboration between Leiden University and the creative and, got mixed in my notes. Yes, at the Piet Zwart Arts, Leiden University and the Royal Academy of Art in The Hague, that's right. My proposal was to investigate the use of video games as feminist tactical media in order to expose the root of exclusions based on sex, gender, class, race, ability, etc., pervasive to gaming communities. That's a mouthful, that's academia. So I departed from the understanding that historically, the multi-billion-dollar video game industry has primarily catered to a straight, white, cis male audience. And this was very visibly demonstrated by, among others, the Gamergate events of 2014. And since then, several authors, and even before that, several authors have stressed the role of video games as a reproductive technology, amongst which most famously Vicky Osterweil. Really recommend Vicky Osterweil if you're interested in this topic. So what does video games as a reproductive technology means? It means that video games train subjects, workers, etc. in ways that subscribe to dominant capitalist ideology, which isn't, of course, monolithic. It's ripe with contradictions, but it refers to certain values, behaviors, and attitudes which are routinely promoted and rewarded. And my proposal also, however, stemmed from the understanding that the ability of video games to engage and entertain and reproduce may also be explored for the contrary, for the dissemination of alternative, emancipatory political contents. And so indeed, in this book, Games of Empire, the authors propose that the growing array of activist video games with an explicitly political message to appear from the year 2000 onwards mark the entry of video games into the tradition of tactical media, which is this movement. Well, it's not really a movement in the 90s, but it started being popularized in the 90s, which is the activist appropriation of media for purposes and uses other than the originally intended ones. So it was quite at a time where DIY media became more widely accessible and people could take kind of, in a way, the means of production, of media production into their own hands a little bit more. And so this is also how I came to explore more of the alt game scene. That is, practices that don't neatly fit into accepted video game genres and conventions. Very often, and they are even questioned, are these actual games? But alt games can comprise art games, tiny games, and are developed by individuals or smaller groups. They seemingly operate at this borderline of interactive storytelling, net art, poetry, simulation, visual essay, etc. And often, indeed, test the limits of what a game might be. And while not all alt games are tactical media, of course, but what I found interesting in this niche is the ability of these art games, these tiny experiences, to explore the dialectics of self and collective, individual and systemic. So intimate interactive narrative experiences can easily become excuses to address asymmetric power relations, oppression of minorities, economic inequality, etc. So I have an example here, which is Parasite by Porpentine, which is an experience also of being, well, it's about many things, but it includes their experience of being a trans person, in transition, and how to survive in that situation. And so, yeah, while I was exploring that, I got offered the opportunity to teach in relation to the research I was conducting for my PhD. This is me in the classroom. I always take my banjo. So in 2021, I got the opportunity to lead a special issue that Michael just talked about at the Experimental Publishing Masters. And then that opportunity turned into teaching 2 other special issues. And we had, of course, indeed, always the same partner, which was Page Not Found, 404, recurring theme today. And so the first one was actually the Situationist Times. For the topics of these trimesters, I want to say that they were either proposed to me by Amérique, the former course leader, or Sébastien, who is the director of Page Not Found. And then I, of course, would twist it to talk about what I wanted, or it was more of a collaboration. This one is a proposal from Amérique and Sébastien, which was the Situationist Times. And the question that was asked was, what would the 7th issue of the Situationist Times look like nowadays? So for a little bit of context, what is the Situationist Times? So the Situationist Times was originally intended to be an English language counterpart to the International Situationniste, which was a publication by the Situationist International, the avant-garde movement of the 60s. And this publication was initiated in 1962 by the Dutch artist Jacqueline de Jong as a response to her expulsion from the Situationist International, because Guy Debord expelled everyone. So this special issue took as its point of departure, indeed, the never published 7th issue of the Situationist Times, which was going to be on the topic of pinball. And thinking about what that issue might look like nowadays, we proposed that it might dive into the topic of video games. So this is where I gave my twist. And I was helped in this twist by Marxist philosopher Paulo Virno, who in an essay called In the Age of Pinball said that video games were actually the successor to pinball. And yeah, actually this is from an interface that Michael was involved in designing, right? Yeah, just a little shout out. And so my first immediate concern was also to find a proper connection between the Situationists and video games, which was not very difficult because play was a very fundamental aspect of the theories and tactics of the Situationists. They were in essence jokesters, very serious ones, yes, but very committed to exposing the ridicule in everyday life under consumerist capitalism. And so together with the students and the other XPUB tutors, the topic was explored through the annotations of texts in video games, in-class discussions, hands-on creating various video gaming experiments, also with Michael and Manetta, the prototyping tutors, We started by looking at the history and legacy of the situationist movement. We had discussions about the connections between video games, pinball, and situationism. We also talked about definition of play in games. We had presentations diving into the cultural context of specific video games picked by the students, etc. And this is actually when the one-sentence game idea started. Inspired by Pippin, I thought this would be a great way for students to understand what a game is without having to actually design a game. And so I asked the students to write at least one sentence game idea every week, and we started every class by reading this. It was a sort of morning ritual. Yeah, it's a pity that it's no longer online. That's the other provocation. So, for the launch of the special issue, which was titled I Don't Know Where We're Going But, we had this dérive inspired by the situationists. It was actually also very convenient because we could not all be in the space. It was still 2021, really like lockdown times. So it was an urban pinball game in the city of The Hague, where the players, us, were the pinball machine. And so we would be launched across The Hague to 5 different locations, where we would gain access to 5 local networks hosted by the Raspberry Pi, or 5 Raspberry Pis, where we could be given access to the materials developed by the students during the course of the trimester, which took the form of mini games, essays, game mods. Here we see some examples from the students. Actually, this one in the middle, Una Lee, it's about being catcalled in the street. So also talking about the dérive as a sort of gendered kind of activity. And so for the following special issue, we already talked about it extensively, which is called Productive Play. That was the original name, or not the original name. We always have the name of the special issue and the name of the publication. The name of the special issue that gave rise to the cube, the box, was Productive Play, in which we explored gamification in its many forms. And we explored the many ways video games are explicitly or implicitly making us more, not less, productive. We talked about predatory monetization schemes such as in-game advertising, microtransactions, loot boxes, downloadable content, etc., etc. Gold mining. So, for the final output, actually, contrary to the year previous, which we didn't give the students a fixed format to work with, we actually said that you are going to design a loot box. We said, this is a challenge, of course, because you will have to publish it in a way that subverts, or at least questions in some ways, the format. And during our sessions, we, of course, continued discussing these blurring lines between labor and play by getting acquainted with a significant number of gamification strategies. We talked about the blurring relationship between work, labor, and play, leisure as a contested space, and we also looked at games as reproductive technologies, of course. And so complementarily, our now retired writing tutor, Steve Rushton, introduced the students to the concept of ideology. And in order for the students to apply these notions to their lived reality, Steve gave them an exercise. Students were asked to read ideology in everyday objects. And this was very influential for me because I thought I could really grab that and have them read ideology in the video games that they were picking, and then write a fan fiction based on their reading of the ideology of the game to sort of rewrite that ideology. So for example, what we're seeing here is one of the examples. It's the Katamari Damacy fan fiction. And yeah, of course, like last year, we continue with the ritual of reading and writing one-sentence game ideas. And so for the launch, in which this beautiful box was showcased, it was at Page Not Found. We could already have the event inside. The space was designed as a choose-your-own adventure game, leading the visitor through all the works present in the space. the Bitsy game that Michael mentioned, which is indeed reflecting on this loot box and on the blurring divisions between play, games, leisure, self-care, and self-work. The students could also sing, or not the students, all of us could sing karaoke. Developed as a result of an annotation exercise we did during class about how games were making us more productive. It's called Can Gaming Make a Better World? The original song is Video Killed the Radio Star. It's very catchy. The students also organized a bar called Phage Not Pound, where visitors were invited to consider these blurring lines between leisure and labor, because drinks would only be served on the condition that the costumer first solve a clue on a crossword puzzle first. And this crossword puzzle was itself an offshoot of a glossary that we had introduced in the class. So yeah, it kept coming back. And then the last one, but not least, Candles, Tarot, and Joysticks, was co-developed and co-taught with Artemis Grilaki, who's not only a friend, but also an artist and web designer working around topics of feminism and technology. We explored the world-building characteristics found both in rituals and video games. We critically considered those worlds, identifying the key points and elements through which specific video games and rituals circulate political, cultural, and social values. So again, this idea of reproductive technologies. And as a final output, we proposed the Oracle deck as a format. We continue establishing this connection. We had this sort of discussions, mappings, again, the same topics that we had already discussed in previous issues came back, but now we were also making the connection with rituals and power structures. And this time I actually developed a list of prompts for reading ideology in video games before they did the fan fiction exercise to give it a bit more of a structure, and which I will also be using tomorrow for the workshop. And yeah, this year, instead of the one-sentence game ideas, we had a little bit of a twist. We did the one-sentence ritual ideas. Wait, yes, this is the right one. And this is actually a coffee, fortune-telling coffee reading, ritual that we did. And so we would start with rituals every morning that the students had developed for us. And then in the launch, the final publication was called Console, and the participants of the event were invited to explore the box, which had Oracle decks. It was a box for collective and self-care and, to kind of reflect and heal from capitalist structures. Yeah, so now, what about my own practice, I think people might be asking. How is it connected to this research? That's a very good question, because I have indeed initiated also some small practical experiments here and there, so mostly with Bitsy. So this is Taraxacum. It's very tongue-in-cheek, so it's my main character, Prudence, works at this video game company. It was inspired by this news of Blizzard, Activision, when there was a lot of accusations of sexual harassment and toxic frat boy kind of environment going on there. So yeah, she works at this sort of company. You go around the office collecting items that symbolize this frat culture, so a cup of vodka, mascot goat from the rival game studio, etc. And then you use these items that you collect to perform a ritual as a bonding exercise with your female and non-binary colleagues, and poof, the Toxic Game Company is magically a feminist video game co-op now. Yeah. And then there's this next one, which is a more intimate experience. It's a poetic video game-ish, kind of inspired by my grandma and her sisters living in rural Portugal in the 30s, 40s under a dictatorship. So my grandma, she's still alive and she's 102 now. And for the longest time, she still had most of her sisters alive, and the conversations between them were very illuminating about how they experienced being a woman in those times, and how a lot of them, you could see, like my great aunt said, yeah, why would you have kids? Why would you put people on this earth to suffer? and she only had the one kid because she was forced to. So this game is kind of reflecting on this kind of experiences and also the type of knowledge of herbs that they have, and yeah. So yeah, it was indeed a little bit my attempt to use this tiny art game to talk about this friction of the individual and the systemic. And I also wrote a fan fiction, of course. I wrote a fan fiction about Elder Scrolls Online, in which a very regular human, like us, gets zapped into the world of Elder Scrolls Online and somehow manages to contact her best friend back on Earth. It comments on some formal aspects of video games, such as the artificiality of the quests and how somehow the main character is responsible for saving everyone. And also reflects on some content aspects. In the case of Elder Scrolls Online, patriarchy-infused themes of female hysteria, and also this assumption that women are naturally more nurturing and caring and mothering, and etc. But with the teaching gigs at XPUB, which luckily became a more stable position as a writing tutor, and with my other job as a student advisor for the bachelor's, we call it study career coach, plus the research and the writing, plus personal life, etc. I did not have as much time as I would have liked to dedicate myself to more consistent explorations of video games. And not having a background in programming or game design, I also was limited to these options afforded by free open source low barrier platforms, which is nothing wrong with that, but I wanted to get something more out of it, I guess. So at this point, I started thinking about my teaching as a creative practice. The world building of the classroom, the making up of this microcosm of the special issue, be it through the exercises, the discussions we had, the games we played, the rituals we developed together. So among others, this practice consists of designing the syllabus, for example, curating a reading list, facilitating and structuring the space for discussion and dialogue, developing exercises. It is a practice of making space, laying down the infrastructure, building a world that allows for the building of other worlds. So it's also about how I position myself in that space. And so what is then my authorial action within this context? Because artists have authorial actions, apparently. So my initial authorial act is, I guess, to hold and create space for discussion, debate, creative construction, and deconstruction within a given topical universe. What Brazilian educator and activist Paulo Freire calls the content program of education. So, of course, he's been a big inspiration for me. He wrote Pedagogy of the Oppressed, for those who are not familiar. So the authorial act in this sense is shared in the process of becoming. So the space becomes co-held and co-created as the students enter into it and transform it into their own. It does not mean I am not present, of course, or that I do not participate in this co-creation, only that my authorial voice gradually softens. It also does not mean that I do not continue curating the space, delimiting its boundaries, and providing and maintaining its underlying structure. Of course, there's still some authority. But I like to think of these as the structures of an Aldo van Eyck's playground, which are as unconstraining as possible towards the use that the students make of the space. So in my classroom, I want to create hopeful pockets of alternative ways of relating to each other and to the world. I want to contribute to the move towards education as the formation of informed, critical, and questioning people who are prepared to engage with the world around them from a disenchanted, yet not cynical, very important, perspective. And this is why the end goal of my activity as a teacher, I guess, is to turn spectators into actors, which is a principle derived from critical pedagogy. So again, Paulo Freire, Augusto Boal, yeah, all these names. And so, among others, just to talk a little bit more about this classroom as artistic practice, there's this art historian, Claire Bishop, who tackled the topic of the classroom as a work of art in the context of participatory aesthetics. And she proposes that the goal of such projects seems to be less the production of sophisticated artworks and more the experience produced by and for the participants. So in all of this, of course, I had to put my cat. In all of this, inevitably, the direction of my PhD changed, and it has currently reached the stage where I am looking at video games, education, and ideology together. Concretely, I'm investigating how the teaching of video games as an artistic medium can contribute to identifying and deconstructing ideological discourse, ultimately working towards rewriting it. Yeah, that's the hope. In this, I am inspired, of course, by Stuart Hall and his injunction that popular culture is a site of struggle. So in the special issues I have conducted, the students have investigated possible ways of doing so through the lens of video games. They write ideology in popular games, they wrote fan fiction, they misplay these games, they develop new games, they develop new mods, etc. And so I am now writing my thesis about this. This is my thesis process. If you're wondering what you're looking at, I will explain it a little bit more in detail. So I'm writing my thesis now as a video game script. And the game opens with a class at the Experimental Publishing Masters. So it will be a semi-fictional class that is an amalgamation of many different aspects of the 3 special issues. And the whole narrative takes place during this class. The activities, the dialogues, the exercises, the pieces of writing and conversations are plot devices to present my argumentation. And so why did I develop these floor plans? Well, I developed these floor plans that are here and here as a way to visualize my argument and how my argument moves in space. And because I'm developing it as a video game script, I also want to make a video game itself. And so I designed the classroom, the studios, very inspired by the actual architecture of the Willem de Kooning. And to kind of indeed move the argument and visualize how the argument moves in space and also how it progresses and how I can make it. And as a way, of course, not of translating, but of investigating the research question in a different way. So I'm really at the beginning of this process, but what I can show you right now indeed is this draft stage of these floor plans. And I will be developing this as an interactive fiction. I might be using Twine. In any case, it will be this kind of investigation in the boundaries of interactive fiction, net art, poetry, visual essay, etc. And yes, I can drink my tea now. And I hopefully will open that door. Thank you so much.
Wow. So we have filled the space with pretty a lot of ideas. Like there are threads in here that I think we can pull together in the admittedly small amount of time that we have for discussion. But we're having lunch together, so there's no problem there from my perspective. I have about, I don't know, I've got 2,000 words of notes here, so I'm just going to sort of try and have a little look through here. But I think one of the unifying things I'm really curious about, so from my perspective, I'm deeply interested in practices of documentation. Personally, very, very interested in that from the perspective of reflective practice, the Donald Schoen thing of like how important it is to that the truly great designers are aware of their conversation with the materials as they use them, and they're able to externalize their thinking, and that this is one of the big desirable goals for pedagogy, is that you want to create these people who are capable of thinking about process as it happens, because at least in that telling, that's how you sort of learn to become better. And then we have we've got this like very strong pedagogical element from both of you. Producing these cubes, for example, but also an incredible inspiring, and I mean this is just a continuation of what happened for me in Rotterdam, just very, very inspired by XPUB's approach to open source, but just like the commitment to all of this process stuff, which I don't think is super common. I don't see it in a lot of places. And so I guess what I would be interested in starting with is your sort of big picture, like what's the pedagogical value of this, that you actually, do you see this stuff enter into the students? Do they all become committed documenters? Does the sheer thing of documenting lead them to become more reflective about things? That's a starting point. I could like complicate that more and more, but let's start with something sort of relatively simple, like documentation plus student equals what?
Right. Well, maybe I'll just start off by saying, I mean, it was such an amazing pleasure actually to go in, because I sort of started out thinking of preparing just with this kind of device of like what would be the X-ray of the publication. And I must say I've learned a lot through actually just the density of actually and the quality of the documentation that I came across. So even having been part of that process, I mean, like I said, I was a bit distracted at that moment of the transition and everything, and it was a bit of a blur, honestly. So it was really amazing to see, indeed, be reminded of like, oh, indeed, we had that session about the license discussion due to the documentation that students had made and in their own personal reflections through that process. And honestly, actually, another aspect which I'll just throw in now, which was a kind of urgency, is actually, it's interestingly, there's challenges actually in, for instance, I mean, I talked about actually the resources needed to keep platforms running, but even things like actually we have from the school privacy concerns about do things stay online? So, and for instance, examples like a personal reflection from a student made in their wiki 5, 10 years ago, what status does that have? Which got me really then busy with thinking about how would you want to, not just on a technical level, thinking about how these things like the Wayback Machine could maybe exist in kind of more durable forms, but also then socially thinking about ideally that could be part of that community process to also think about what do we want to share, also thinking about these kind of CC2R, what needs to be left behind, what does this group want to leave behind, and yeah, to kind of capture more, capture, this is a terrible word, unfortunately.
Harvest.
Indeed, yeah, well, harvesting is just as, but indeed actually create a space where actually this community can make those decisions about like, okay, how do we want to leave what behind? So yeah, that's a bit sidestepping this question, but yeah, that was something that is very much in my mind now too, and thinking about how to expand the boundaries of then what a publication could be.
Because maybe I can share, because I was both a student and now I'm a tutor, so I think I can share from also the perspective of how it influenced me as a student, because this idea of using the wiki was really new to me when I joined the course as a process of documenting, and even the focus on documentation and reflection and sharing the notes with each other, and having this also for the assessments, having this page. For me, it really changed actually how I approach my practice and how I reflect on my practice, and I thought this was something that I also brought into the classroom. That it is indeed a big insistence, and I think it is a very valuable one. It helped me so much, and I also see it in the students especially when they go into their second year and they have to write their thesis, and they can just look back, and they have this wealth of notes and resources and processes that they have documented thoroughly. So I think even just if we're talking about for the internal life of the course, I think it's very healthy to have this, very useful. I don't know if that answers.
Absolutely, no. I mean,
question.
if you don't mind, I'll keep chasing this just because it's one of the things that I think that unifies your perspectives in a really cool way. So we're running this research project called Materializing Design, which is one very specific related approach to like how do we make video games and capture or harvest the process that goes into them, not just the final artifact, not just, I don't know, intermittent builds or a post-mortem, but like what really happened in some, loosely defined sense. And one of the things that we definitely run into is that it's really hard to do for students especially, but also for kind of anybody. To such an extent that, I think we've speculated about, like, are there personalities that find documentation an easier practice? Is it that the written form, which I think tends to get privileged, is like, that's more of a problem? Like, what are your observations there? And like, how do you guide the students in like, what kinds of documentation should they be doing? What voice should they be writing in? What should they be looking for when they do this kind of stuff? I need to know.
Let's see. Of course, we have this focus on the writing, but not to say that we privilege it over other forms. I'm more from the writing perspective because I'm the writing tutor, so I guess I have that bias. But what we have this beautiful, I wish I could have it at hand to show it, this beautiful GIF of Jean-Claude Van Damme that Marloes, my colleague and our colleague actually, but my direct colleague because she's also a writing tutor, shows the student we show the students every year, and she made it. It's like of him like having this split between two trucks,
yeah, of course.
right?
That's the image.
Yeah, that's an image, and one is practice, and the other one is the theory. And it's about not letting Jean-Claude Van Damme fall. And I think the process of documentation and reflecting and how you choose to document and what you document and how you document should always be in the service of exploring indeed what I was telling you about the research question in different ways, not privileging one form over the other, but knowing that people have different relationships to writing, of course, and we want to acknowledge that while at the same time showing that it is a valuable skill to verbalize what sometimes is implicit, right, and what sometimes is very intuitive. And once you start verbalizing, it's a practice like any other. It's not that it's like a theory is theory. No, theory is practice as well. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's nice.
And maybe the thing that it makes me think about is when you talk about, indeed, it is hard, actually, these situations we're putting in. And actually, this example of the awkwardness is something that's so important to bring up, because I think also from a pedagogic point of view, we often say we have a seamful pedagogy, like in the sense of, as so many kind of, for instance, with digital tools and platforms that are also pushing in, by the way, on we're very much being pushed to sort of use this, the solution that we have from the school. We really push back on that, say, no, we realize that actually this kind of weird patchwork of self-hosted and other frameworks or platforms and tools are a way to also say that we're not trying to kind of solve solutions and sort of stay with the trouble. And so that's, something I think that we really, from a pedagogic point of view, spend some time to think about. And that's also about actually that, indeed, we often are bringing people who do not have technical backgrounds together with those who do, and in both cases, it's really a challenge to make sure that the people are actually embracing that awkwardness, slowing down, sometimes kind of stepping back from ways of working that they're comfortable with, and saying, okay, we're in a space now for 2 years where we don't have a kind of production deadline, or we don't have a commercial project that needs to be done. And so, the other thing we're often saying is create spaces where you can fail successfully. So not burn out, but indeed make mistakes and look at the consequences for good or bad, and take some time, actually. So that was,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that it's great that I'm aware as well. It's 12:30, but maybe I can sneak in one more kind of thing to get my value out of this. Your quotation of the awkwardness stuff I thought was really, super important, and it comes up in so many different kind of philosophies of it's like the Heidegger thing, and Sean talks about delightfully simple. He says that there's this thing called the stop and think, where something happens and you pull back and you have to reflect. And I think I like that idea that the underlying technology could do that to you kind of on purpose. I think encouraging that is kind of inspiring and in the face, like an in your face to Silicon Valley kind of smoothness. I was wondering about all of those platforms. How do the students react? I mean, this is like I'm a very concrete person. Like, students come into, for instance, our design program and our computation arts program, and they want industry standard. I want Creative Cloud. I don't want Blender. I want Maya. I don't want. and they're, you know, they will use the software that's being taught, but like, do you have any experience with kind of convincing people that this is like, how does that play out in the program in terms of wanting people to do this kind of slightly awkward thing on purpose? How do you sell that to them?
Well, it's a challenge, actually, for sure, and it's a recurring theme.
That's reassuring.
Yeah, absolutely. No, but this is why, you know, we basically have two things that we talk about when also literally also in the process of people applying to the program, learning about the program, making the decision if it's the right program for them. We talk about the combination of this desire to open up the boxes and look at the materiality of software, and even if that's not going to be your thing in the future, but to at least in this 2-year window be interested in that, but also together with the fact and constraint that you will be doing this with others. So that whole collective aspect of actually the work, I think, has really grown, certainly actually also with the turn and the focus on XPUB, that really became an essential part of the formula, that it's really about, and we've been really super fortunate to have, and that's actually been a sort of positive feedback loop, I think, in the focus, that we're starting to really bring people from diverse backgrounds, diverse practices into the program who are excited by the fact that they're going to be in this group of diverse practitioners, and already also are thinking about actually indeed wanting to question their tools, so it's delicate, and you know, but that it goes back to, I think, again, when I remember Femke Snelting's insistence on this rule, it was exactly about, well, you can't have people, you know, producing their kind of professional-looking stuff through InDesign at the same time give that space for people to be trying something for the first time. It's not fair, or it creates this kind of imbalance. So that's where it really it is sometimes difficult to pull people back a bit, and but yeah, we try to really be upfront about that and make clear then why it is that can be fruitful. And happily, yeah, I've had good experiences. I think the students do kind of say, okay, yeah, actually this is an interesting this brings me a new perspective, or I'm now collaborating in a way that I haven't collaborated before. This is something I can personally say I've learned absolutely. It's not something I've had in my practice before, really, to be so collaborative and open, actually, to what collaboration can mean.
Oh, and if I can just, last thing, because this, and I think this is absolutely, this is for both of you, and maybe Lídia can jump on first. This question of collaboration, and especially from what I saw of the students when I was over there, very, very diverse practices, diverse topics, even within this cube, very diverse kind of like voices, perspectives. And so again, practically, because this is something I don't do either, Michael, like my practice is just like, it's just me in a room with a laptop typing. That's like what it looks like to create work for me. I'm always really curious about these like larger, bigger collaborative efforts, like these publications, in relation to, how do you do reflective practice? How do you have people documenting process, reflecting, saying what things mean in this like big group where, I don't know, I assume that there are some really fantastic things about there. I'm trying to be extremely positive about this, even as I shy away from it personally. Like, what are the kinds of things that happen? How do you kind of manage this explosion of voices and information into something beautiful?
Well, it doesn't always go so, indeed, seamless. Because, and it's really dependent, of course, on group dynamics. Every group is a different group, and it's always a conversation, especially in the first and second trimesters, where they're starting to know each other and learning how to collaborate with each other. So, there's, in the classroom, what we try to facilitate a little bit as a special issue editor, I think it's different than, for example, as a writing tutor.
Right.
Because as a special issue editor, I really had sessions like there were the content sessions where we would really be discussing like the theme and the topics more thoroughly, and then we would switch halfway through the trimester to do the production and the production mode. And that could be difficult sometimes. That could be a challenge because, especially in the first year, it was all online. So how do you do that online? That was one thing. So you really have to come with either like as a tutor, very structured ways of like okay, we have to make decisions on these things. We can delegate certain aspects. So are you going to do the team division? We also give them a lot of autonomy because ultimately it's their project, it's their publication. We're there as facilitators. And, or at least I was trying to be more as a facilitator and having this kind of trying consensus decision making, trying different ways of voting, of moving around the room to kind of agree on certain things. I remember this as a writing tutor, actually, session where I was like, okay, who agrees with this statement? Go to this side of the room. Who disagrees, go to this side. Yeah. Someone in the middle, so you could position yourselves, and then we could kind of have discussions about what we're going to do and make collective agreements and have these socio-technical protocols, we would call them. So yeah, there are ways of working around it, but also the students, and especially this group, they developed this role-playing game for collective decision-making themselves. We were not involved in that process at all, and it was really fascinating how they... Yeah, so indeed, it depends on the group. I don't know if you want to add something.
No, definitely. I mean, I think it fits in. It's indeed, I mean, I think one of the biggest lessons that I've learned taking over, again, from Amrik with the coordination role was actually how much also to step back. And so in the case of this group, indeed, I mean, that's what's really important in all of this is giving space as well to the group to find each other, to create a dynamic between them. And to really facilitate that. And actually, that was the fact of this group. Actually, they've continued on as a collective afterwards.
Oh,
actually,
wow.
there's a thing, the blobshopcollective.org is the website that they continue, working together. And actually, indeed, and I think I see there some XPUB students as well are commenting in the chat. But yeah, this is absolutely a really essential part of, and the delicacy in it too, because of course you can't always guarantee what group dynamic is going to be. But yeah, we were super fortunate, and I think I've learned huge amounts. I mean, yeah, the kitchen, I think, was the exercise indeed that was developed. So also being open to seeing actually what is being produced in this group actually has been extremely satisfying for myself to see.
Well, I think that's a really, like ending with the students and the people who do the work, and indeed the blobshopcollective.org is a great place to stop. I want to talk about collectives more at lunch though, because they've got many more questions down that line. But for now, thanks to everybody for joining us. And for those of us at Concordia, Lídia and Michael are around all week, like stand-up comedians, so you can try and catch up with them for coffee and things like that. Thanks.
Thanks, Pippin. Thanks, Lídia. Thanks, Michael. Thank you for coming in. Also, those who are joining us from Rotterdam, it's great to have you in the Zoom audience. We're going to be closing up our live stream now, but it does remain available on our YouTube channel, and you can revisit it, and you could share it. So much great information and projects there. And yeah, you guys are around. If anyone needs to get into contact with Michael and Lídia while you're here and you're watching somehow, you can contact info.for@concordia.ca, and we'll figure out a way to make a contact that way. And I'm going to wrap this up because it's lunchtime. Okay, thanks.